A disengagement operation. That's how the French army is describing the withdrawal of its forces from Niger. The military headquarters says the pullout of some 1,400 soldiers and personnel will begin this week. Niger's military junta called for the move after seizing power in a coup in July. For more on this story, Paul Melly joins us from London, consulting fellow of the Africa program at Chatham House. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us. Thank you. How will this withdrawal take place? Do we have any information on that?
Well, some details have been emerging this week. We're likely to see the withdrawal, first of all, of several hundred French troops who are stationed in bases just south of Niger's border with Mali, in the zone which is most affected by jihadist terrorist activity that's seen the most violence over recent years, and where the French were working with the Nigerian army, and at one stage also there were some other European special forces there as part of an effort, if you like, to try and stop the jihadist terrorism expanding in that area, spilling over the border from Mali. So those troops are going to get pulled back, first of all, to Niamey, the Niger capital. And as soon as they're there, they will then be flown out to France. Much more complicated and likely to take most of the rest of this year. Will be moving the big heavy equipment at the main French base in Niamey and the troops managing that. And that can't all be flown out. A lot of that will have to come by land.
So I understand that France is clear. Niger wants France out. The message is, loud and clear politically, militarily. But the security situation in the Sahel and the region hasn't changed really, right? So with the departure of these French troops, how is that going to change the security landscape in the region?
Well, it's going to pose a really huge test for the military junta which took power in Niger in late July, displacing the elected president. Because if you look at the statistics, actually for violence, for terrorism in the Sahel over the last year or two, Niger had actually been doing rather well. And not just because of the presence of the French troops, there's also backup from US intelligence, but also the Niger military had been pretty effective, and they were working very closely with these international partners, and the levels of violence and the levels of death were much lower than in neighboring Burkina Faso and Mali. Once the French troops leave, that will reduce the amount of troops available, and obviously reduce, with the removal of some of the French technical capacity, the Mirage jets, for example, reduce the sort of ability to strike back at the armed groups. But there's also a political effect of the current crisis, which is that some military units have been pulled back to Niamey because the junta there is worried that ECOWAS, the West African bloc, might try to intervene as it's warned, to restore civilian democratic rule. And so the security position that had been so successful is become much, much more fragile. We've seen a lot of attacks in the last 2 months. And this week alone, a horrendous attack in which up to 60 soldiers may have been killed, at least 29, possibly as many as 60 troops in an attack on a Nigerian army unit. And the junta hasn't yet set out how it's going to seek to tackle that, because the deposed president, Mohamed Bazoum, had a long-term strategy, if you like, for how he was trying to tackle the security situation. But we haven't really seen the Niger junta set out its own plans. It says it's got help from allies, but as far as one can see, those are small deployments of troops from Burkina Faso and perhaps the promise of help from Mali. But those two countries themselves also have huge security problems to deal with.
Paul Melly, thank you so much for giving us that insight here on France 24. Paul Melly from Chatham House in the UK.
You're welcome.